Hi everyone. This is Srikanth from Capita. I will wait for a couple of minutes as more people join in, and we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Okay, Sujit, should we start?
Yes, Srikanth. Yes.
Okay, great. I think people will trickle in, but I think we should get started in the interest of time. We have a packed agenda for all of you. So thanks for joining in. I think this is wonderful to be hosting this session alongside Pascare. So I'm Srikanth from Capita. Capita basically helps companies manage their ESOPs. So we deal with ESOPs on a day-to-day basis. Pascare is a company that deals with employee benefits and employee insurance. So when Sanchit, who's unfortunately not on this call because he was down with flu, and I discussed on the topic, then we realized ESOP is a great middle point where, and also a very relevant point as of today. So I'm quite excited to be hosting this webinar, which will talk about practical tips to creating your own ESOP policy. And we have a stellar panel. Ankur, the third panelist, will be joining shortly as well. And I'll introduce the other two as well. So I'm excited about 2-3 things, right? So one is the timing at which we are actually doing this discussion, because these are amazing times for the Indian startup ecosystem in a way. We're seeing startups raising a lot of funds, and now looking to hire a lot of their team members, and it is in that context where ESOPs become extremely relevant, if not now even more, I think, than ever before. And that's the reason. I feel that ESOPs are no longer that the line item in your offer letter or a piece of paper. They're becoming like real wealth creators for a lot of employees, as you saw. So we intend to keep this discussion quite holistic, all covering all aspects of ESOPs. We have what we would like to share with you is the key ingredients that make up a good ESOP policy, and then we'll also invite our panelists who have been founders in their own companies to kind of decipher their own recipes of creating their own ESOP plan. And hopefully the takeaway for all of you is that you guys should be able to kind of create your own custom ESOP plans. I will try to keep it interactive so that there's an opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. We'll also try to keep it engaging, hopefully. So we'll see how we run some of these engagement polls and seek your feedback as we do this. So that's with that. Without further ado, let me introduce our stellar panel. So we have Manish with us. So Manish is also Sanchit is the other co-founder. Manish is the co-founder and CTO of Pascare. So Manish comes with a lot of startup experience. He was one of the early team member at Mindtickle, and then went on to do a stint at ClearTax as well. So he has been a recipient of ESOPs while in those stints, and has also benefited from them, and he'll talk more about it. And now he's also the co-founder and CTO at Pascare. So he'll share his perspective around structuring ESOPs from a Pascare point of view. We also have Isha with us. So Isha is our in-house ESOP expert at Capita. So she is both a chartered accountant and a company secretary. And then she's also done a stints with the Big Four. And after that, she went into the ESOP advisory practice, and she was with ESOP Direct for a long period of time, structuring ESOP policies both for the publicly listed and the unlisted private startups as well. So she comes with a breadth of expertise from structuring and the technical aspects. The third panelist who will be joining shortly is Ankur. Ankur is the co-founder and CEO of Nuclei. It's a fintech platform for banks, basically for digital transformation of banks. And he has uniquely done a policy called stock appreciation right, which is one of the forms of the larger ambit of equity linked plans. So he'll be talking and sharing insights about that as well. So that's a little bit on our stellar panel that we have. And the structure is we will kind of first look at it a meta picture or a strategic level, then go into the nuances of the various ESOP ingredients, like I mentioned, and then kind of open it out to questions, right? So that's broadly the structure. So I hope we're all set. So maybe my first kind of question, maybe, or thing, maybe I'll ask Isha basically to come and so we even this topic we have chosen is ESOPs, right? But we know that let's take a step back, and ESOPs is just one part of or one aspect of this larger umbrella of long-term incentives, or what are called as equity linked incentives, right? So maybe Isha, would you like to decode ESOPs for this audience, or long-term incentives for this audience, and where do ESOPs come as part of it, right? And then we will double click on each of those aspects as we go along. So over to you, Isha.
Thank you so much, Shrikant. Good evening, everyone. Yes, ESOPs is a small, is a small hole in the big gamut of what is called as long-term incentive, plans. Now, long-term incentive plans, as the name suggests, are long-term incentives or bonuses which are deferred over a period of time. These incentives are basically introduced to achieve, the retention and reward objective here. It is an incentive which is rewarding the loyalty part of your employees. So this has to be something which is for a period of time. It is not achievable in a short period of time. Now, when you look at long-term incentives are classified mainly in two types. One, which I will just start sharing my screen here.
Sure, that will help. Yeah.
Yeah. Sujit, I'll need some help here to share my screen.
Right. So maybe I think we'll set you up. Yeah, maybe you can continue, Isha, and then we'll add you
Sure.
rights. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I was saying, that long-term incentive plans are classified mainly in two big bags. One being the equity settled bag and the other being the cash settled bag. Now, as the name suggests, equity settled are those kind of plans which are linked to your equity price. Now, since they are linked to your equity price, to your equity cap table, they could be settled either in cash or in shares. Now, here the cash need not be coming out of the company's pocket. It could be externally funded. But when you look at cash linked instruments, these are essentially cash driven, and here the funding is there is a funding impact on the company's balance sheet. So these instruments have to be widely chosen for a particular class, whereas equity instruments could be chosen for a wider coverage when you look at a plan design. Now, further, these instruments can be classified into various smaller buckets, one of them being ESOPs, which every one of us knows. ESOPs is nothing but the shares which are determined at a
Isha, I
price
think you can
today.
share your slide now. It must be working.
Sure. Is my screen
you
visible?
can make it full. Yeah, you can make it full screen. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So like I was saying, the first part being equity settled and the second part being cash settled. Now, once we have understood the basic of what equity settled stands for and cash settled stands for, we have further options of instruments that could be utilized or evaluated, explored under each of these categories. So under the equity settled instruments, we have the plain vanilla ESOPs, which are usually used nowadays. And each one of us are aware that these are shares which are determined at a price today with the right in the hands of the employees to buy these shares tomorrow. Then comes the RSUs, or the restricted stock units, which are talking about deep discounted ESOPs, deep discounted shares, which are ideally at zero price or nominal price, and that could be again bought in the future. Then we talk about the stock purchase plan. Now, the stock purchase plan is similar to ESPP. You would have heard about this concept where employees are allowed to purchase shares on an immediate basis. Now, these shares are also discounted in nature, but the share could be actually purchased as on today, kept it in our demat account for a longer period of time, and then sold it eventually at a later period in time. Then we look at the right side of the screen, which talks about the cash settled instruments. One being the phantom stock. Now, phantom stock is a unit which has a predetermined formula. Here you can cap the appreciation, the funding that is to be, it could be limited from a company perspective. It doesn't, since it is a cash settled one, it does not have an impact on the dilution. There are no shares that are directly involved in this instrument. Then we have deferred performance units. Now, as the name suggests, these are performance driven units which could be linked to either the individual performance, it could be linked to the company performance, it could have varied flavors of probably target, sales targets. So these are instruments which have a performance driven culture in them. And then finally, I'll come to one very, nuanced instrument, which is the stock appreciation rights. Now, it is strategically placed in the center of the screen because this instrument can be either settled in cash or it can be settled in equity. This is one instrument which has a flavor of both. And I'm sure Ankur is going to take up more on this part. He has been introducing this instrument in his organization. So he will throw more light. But just to help you all understand that this is, as the name suggests, it is an appreciation of the stock that is shared with the employee. So as the stock grows, the appreciation that is arrived on each equity share is either shared in the form of equity or it is shared in the form of cash.
Great. Wonderful. I think thanks for laying that out for us, Isha. So I think while we use ESOPs quite usually, like casually across, it might have these kind of nuances. While I think, Isha, one question I have is, while you laid all this out, still I think most companies issue ESOPs at an early stage, right? Is that your experience from the industry?
Yes, ESOPs is a commonly used terms. They might be utilizing, there might be hybrid models which are actually in practice, but commonly known as ESOPs. The vanilla ESOPs are something which are, almost 90% of the companies who are operating on a vanilla ESOP plan.
Okay, so no wonder we call all the schemes generically ESOPs, but yeah, I think we'll invite Ankur to talk more about stock appreciation rights once he joins. But thanks for putting it all out here. So these are all the choices. I think the founders and the CFOs, etc., who have joined today. These are all the different options on which you can actually structure your own long-term incentive plans. And before I move to Manish, I think one ritual I didn't do because I was just waiting for the full strength to come in. So maybe I'll actually invite Sujit. Like I was telling that we'll try to keep this session as engaging as possible. So one is let's understand who all are there in the room. So maybe Sujit, if you can run the first poll, right? Where we can just invite everyone to respond and just understand, okay, who's in the audience, and then have they engaged with ESOPs in the past. So Sujit, would you do that? Yeah, okay. So it's a quick poll. So maybe you can take 30 seconds to answer this, and maybe Sujit, you can also flash the results once everyone has responded. So yeah, I think there are just 2-3 simple questions, nothing complicated here. So please respond, and this also helps us to cater our discussion to the kind of audience we are with today. Okay, so while the audience is filling in the poll, I'll come to you, Manish, and I think you come with a very unique flavor because you were earlier employee at a couple of startups, like you mentioned. You were an early member at MindTickle. You were there for a long period. You also kind of cashed out there, so I would like to know about that as well. And also ClearTax, you also experienced, you were a recipient of ESOPs there. So Manish, like what has your experience wearing, before you wear the founder hat, now wearing the employee hat, what was your experience receiving these ESOPs? And yeah, I mean, please share your experience and then we can get into Pascare. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, like it gives a lot of financial stability, and it helps you build wealth in a longer term, as Isha was initially mentioning. So particularly from if you stay in a company for a longer term, then you can actually cash out more benefit in terms of the ESOPs, because you would have got ESOPs in the initial phase, and as you are growing at a different levels, right? And ESOPs at different levels would be different, and generally they keep on getting added to your kitty, and over a long period of time, if the company is becoming successful, then it creates a good amount of wealth on that front. So from employee perspective, kind of gives a financial stability, and it also gives you a feeling of ownership of the company. So when you really look back and see that, oh, I have got this much amount of ESOPs in the company, then you work harder, and essentially like you are in part, like you are along with the founders to do anything which comes on the way.
Understood. No, that's great. I think it kind of corroborates with what Isha was saying. See, these are long-term incentives. So I think if you're looking at a short-term stint, then maybe value creation through ESOPs might not be possible. So I think you need to stay, and we'll dissect the various nuances which actually make this possible, like what is a cliff, what are vesting, and I'm sure Manish, you would have gone through that, and obviously accrued a lot of options which you could basically liquidate at the end of maybe the liquidity event or things like that. So wonderful. So maybe I think Sujit, we can maybe stop the poll. It's fine. Maybe it's still good to see what everyone has responded. So maybe you can flash the result as well. To just get an insight of so wonderful. So I think most people who have joined are in the finance category. So I think we should be slightly careful with the kind of finance things we mentioned. But yeah, more finance professionals. I'm assuming CFOs and HR professionals. And second is the employees. So that's interesting to know. So I think some of the we can actually bring some nuances around from an employee experience perspective as well. And there are some corporates, but then founders are the third. So wonderful. And I think we are majority have ESOPs, so that's good to know. And hopefully the remainder will get some insights on how to structure one in this session. And yes, I think as expected, most of them have experienced ESOPs, as Isha was mentioning as well. So that's kind of good insight to begin as well. So Manish, thanks for that. Now that you reflected from an employee perspective, now if I ask you to wear your founder hat back, right? And now that you've switched from being an employee and receiving, some cash outs as well, which also was perhaps less frequent earlier, but now it's happening more frequently, as you can imagine. Now, from a founder perspective, what has changed in terms of your perspective in setting up employee-friendly ESOPs? Now, what's the kind of discussions you have had with Sanchit and setting up your ground rules as to what should be your ESOP policy? So, anything you want to throw to the audience at a strategic level? We'll of course get into the details as in the future. Yeah.
Yes, so the first decision that we need to take while building a startup is like how do we allocate the ESOPs to our key hires, and how many key hires are going to be there in the company, and how exactly to go about allocating ESOPs to them. And then in a longer term, like how to boost that ESOP at different stages of the company. That is also one more vital factor. And then finally, around the vesting of the ESOPs itself. So how would the vesting go about? And then when can you buy the ESOPs? Right. So there is like once the ESOPs are vested, then at the end of when a employee is exiting, then essentially like they have a period over which they have to buy the ESOP. So how longer you can push that? So these are the various factors that one would want to consider.
Wonderful. I think, and we'll get into each of them. And one important point that Manish highlighted is, ESOPs are not free. You have to buy the options. So they are options that employees get. And eventually, when you have vested it, which means when you have earned it, you have to exercise it, which means you have to buy it at a particular price. And that is called strike price. So we'll actually cover those elements as well. And yes, I think Manish alluded to a lot of these terms, which we'll kind of dissect. But yes, I think Pascal is still in its early days of issuing ESOPs, and hopefully you will do a few liquidity events as well in the coming journey. So with that, so maybe I would actually like to invite Isha again, because Isha, maybe what we can do now is let's go a step below. We have overlay like the broad structures on which, or instruments on which employee incentives are structured. So now let's get into the details of the individual components, and then we'll invite Manish and Ankur to weigh in on those elements. But why don't you share with us the key ingredients of what makes an ESOP policy?
Sure. So rightly, Manish pointed out there are factors which need to be thought of. Quantum of options that are to be given. What should be the strike price? What should happen when the employee is leaving? Whether you should give him a longer period to come and buy those options. So there are in all closely 11 to 12 factors which are essential in framing an entire ESOP plan. So I'll be sharing my screen now to.
Yes. And while Isha brings this up, maybe audience can also start asking any questions using the Q&A option. I'm sure when more details will be discussed, I think you'll have a lot of questions. So yeah, go ahead, Isha.
Okay. So we saw what kind of plans they were. Now let's see what are the parameters or what are the factors that affects entire framework process. Now, very first point here is the structure. Like we said, there are equity settled instruments, then there are cash settled instruments, then there could be hybrid instruments. Now, as a founder, you need to decide whether you want to get into an equity one, whether you want to get into a cash one. Cash one having a funding impact on your own books of accounts, whereas equity has external funding opportunity. Then you look at a route. I mean, from a route perspective, whether you go for a direct route or whether you go for a trust route or you go for an SVP, these could be pointers which could be pondered upon. SVP or a trust route is something which is not commonly functioned in India because of the administrative nuances that are connected to creating of a trust, getting things sorted out. Trust becomes a legal entity, or SVP, as you all know, is a legal entity. So there are additional compliances which are connected to these aspects, and that's where trust route is not a very famous route when you are planning an ESOP plan. Then we have a strategic point, which is coverage. Now, why coverage is very important? You may take this decision at a later point in time, probably, first frame up an entire policy, put it into a pen and paper, and then probably take a decision on coverage. But coverage essentially has an impact on the ESOP pool size. Now, there are companies who are looking at wider coverage. They are wanting to cover every employee who has been working with them, irrespective of their band and designation. So in such cases, you would need a wider pool. But whereas when you want to restrict it to only the CXO or the top management, then you might as well go with a shorter or a smaller pool. So that's where coverage becomes a critical point. Then we look at the ESOP pool size. Now, the point here is there are certain aspects which are connected to creating the ESOP pool size, such as coverage, where you are covering more people, or probably the very next point, which is frequency of grants, where you want to keep granting on an annual basis, where you want to keep granting on a semi-annual basis. You might want to replace your variable pay with the grants, where in such cases you might require a higher size of pool, and that's where ESOP pool size is a cumulative answer for a lot of other factors that have been put up on the screen right now. Then we look at the quantum of options. Now, like Manish said, quantum of options is a very essential question, because this is where your ESOP plan decides to rock with your employees or decides to fail, because there might be disgruntled behavior from the employee perspective, saying that, okay, these options may not be commensurate with the compensation that they were expecting. So how do you actually calculate the right quantum is the key here to decide what could be the right quantum for the employees. It could be on the CTC, it could be on ad hoc basis, it could be linked to your recent fair market value, it could be present value of the future price. It could be a lot of other aspects that could be looked at. Then we have to look at this essential point, which is vesting period. Now, I think bullet or cliff is something which everybody is aware of, but there are other vesting periods, such as front-ended, wherein you are allowed higher percentages in the initial years, and back-ended, which is lower percentages in the initial year. Equal vesting is something which is commonly practiced, and while these vesting periods are in picture, the frequency of vesting is something that has been catching up lately. Companies are getting into a dynamic world where they are seeing quarterly, semi-annually vesting, monthly vesting, daily vesting, so that the wealth creation objective is ideally achieved in this. Now, how is it achieved? It is something which is connected, which shows you how much amount has been vested into your account. The account actually helps you calculate what your wealth is, and that's where it keeps the employee engaged in this entire process. Then we can look at the vesting conditions. Now, vesting conditions, like it says, it is either time-based, that is for the employee to stay with the organization for a longer period, or it could be also performance-based, where you perform, where you achieve particular targets. Targets might be linked to his own personal achievement, or it might be linked to the company's EBITDA, revenue, anything. Or there could be a hybrid model here where for certain amount it could be for the retention objective, and for the certain amount it could be connected to the company's wealth or company's performance, individual performance. Exercise price or the strike price are the essential factors from an employee perspective, because this is what is an employee expected to pay. Now, when you choose an instrument, the options are not free of cost. Options will come with a price. Now, what price could be the right one is the decisive factor from the employer and the employee perspective. Employee may not get a choice here to decide what the price should be, but at least gets an upper side if the price is as low as the face value, or gets to drive the instrument, creates his own wealth by getting a ESOP at FMB and then driving the company's growth to a particular level. So that's where exercise price is more connected to the outflow from the employee perspective, but also it could be a major factor when you're formulating an ESOP plan. Now, exercise period. Now, this is the most critical window, because how you allow your employees to exercise, when you allow your employees to exercise becomes the major player when you want to plan an employee friendly plan. Now, if you say that I want to keep it as an open-ended one, which could be linked to the monetization events that are linked to the external funding events, it could be happening on a multiple platforms, it could be happening in multiple times during a year, and that's where you might be able to give that kind of liquidity for your shares, liquidity for employees to exercise and participate in this plan. Or it could be a fixed period plan where you could say that I will create a window only after 3 years or after 4 years of you staying with the company, and at that point in time I will give you this window to exercise these options and encash the value for these ESOPs. Then the most essential part of the entire plan is what happens when the employee leaves. Now, when an employee leaves, do you allow them to exercise? Do you force them to encash, or do you say that you allow them, to carry these vested options and come back to the company at a later date and time? So nowadays, so it started with companies actually forcibly making their employees exercise on the last working day in the initial period. From there, as on today, you would see that employers are allowing their employees to carry these vested options, and they allow them to come back to the company at a later date, which becomes much more friendlier from not only from the employer or founder perspective, but also from the employee perspective, because most of you would be aware that the minute you exercise, there are taxes which get triggered, and if you are exercising at a later date, your taxes are also getting deferred by that much time. So in and all, you will see that these parameters are very essential to create an employee friendly plan. So while a founder is looking at creating one plan, each point needs to be pondered upon, and only then it can get into a very successful and an easy flowing plan.
Wonderful. So I think thanks for again laying this out very clearly. I think they are quite important parameters. I think both founders need to consider while structuring a friendly policy. More importantly, the employees need to be aware of these, and given that a good amount of people attending today are also employees, they need to really understand what they are really signing up for, right? So with that, so there's one question. There are a few questions, and some of them we'll actually address it during the discussion. Maybe one question, Isha, and maybe for everyone's clarification on the trust or the SPV that you mentioned, the special purpose vehicle. So you mentioned it's not quite common. Maybe that's also from a context of startups. Most public listed companies, I think, still have a trust, mainly, if I recall, right? So that is, I mean, just if you can clarify on that. And also there's a question on what are the advantages of trust route. So you want to elaborate on that?
Okay, sure. So trust root comes up with a with an admin process of setting it up as a legal entity in India. Now, companies who are in the unlisted scenario, not just the bootstrap ones, not just the growing ones, but also matured companies who are in the unlisted scenario, do not want to opt for a trust for several reasons, trust or SVP. One being that there is an administrative cost that is connected with the trust, setting up of the trust, managing of a trust, employing trustees on the trust, because these are all requirement from the legal aspects. Then the second most important part is the dilution, because the minute you decide to create a trust, you are literally parking your shares from your current cap table into a trust or into a SVP. So that means you have an immediate dilution. Now, companies who are in the unlisted scenario would want to propose their businesses to new investors, to institutional investors, wherein having a trust may not be an accepted part. They may not want to have these kind of shares that are been pulled out only for this specific purpose. They might as well get into a dilution impact only while the investment is happening or the fundraising round is happening. So that's the precise reason why a trust route is not preferred in the unlisted scenario. But when it comes to a public listed company, trust sometimes becomes an easier option to manage ESOPs, because the trust has the power to buy shares of this public listed company from the stock exchange. Now, there could be a window where the shares are at a lower rate and they could actually be been bought and parked in the trust. So that's where this is option which is explored by public listed companies more in India.
Right. Yeah, and I think there are a couple more considerations. I think, Isha, you can one is obviously the constraint of private limited, right? I think less than 200 members, shareholders in India. So so people don't consider unless they want to become a publicly listed private or a public listed company. And also I've also heard people doing every time they have to do exercise event or a grant of ESOPs, they would need to call board meetings. So there is also an angle there, right? I think that's why large companies prefer to have a trust. Is that something?
Administrative hassles of setting up, managing, administering the trust are connected to a larger extent in taking a decision here. Like you pointed out, meetings would be one of them. Disclosures, additional trust disclosures are something which are also required. So not just getting them on the board to approve, but also to have these costs connected to their entire management can be pretty overwhelming for companies at the initial life journey. So that's where these are not very preferred from unlisted scenario perspective.
Wonderful. Well, great. I think that's good. Thanks for that clarification. I think Ankur has joined. So maybe Sujit, if you can just make him a panelist, I think, so that we can ask him as well. So there are quite a few questions. I think, Ankur is here. Hi, Ankur. Can you hear us?
Hey man, really sorry. I was stuck in a meeting and just got off. So I just stepped into the lobby of the office and couldn't get a meeting room here. Sorry about this.
No worries. I think
bank's office.
No worries. Appreciate you joining. Yeah. So I think we were just starting, and we discussed a few nuances, and so Isha from our team actually she elaborated the various structures as well as the various ingredients, or what are called as the parameters for structuring ESOPs. So maybe Ankur, now that you've joined, maybe we wanted to hear about SARs from you, because you are one of the just to introduce, I was introducing you earlier as well. One of the other unique elements about Ankur and Nuclei is it's a unfunded bootstrapped company, and it has implemented stock appreciation rights, and then as the ESOP or the long-term incentives plan. And then Ankur also did a buyback event recently. So maybe Ankur, you want to bring out the stock appreciation right, just demystify that for our audience. And there are a few questions. I'll bring them up to you and Manish subsequently. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, sorry guys, I'm really sorry for being late to this meeting. I was supposed to join on time, but then the meeting was just going on and ran a bit longer. But going back to the equity pool, right? This is the fourth company which I'm building, and with having raised VC capital for the previous three companies, when we even began with the idea of this company, we were very clear about one thing, that we are always going to think very long term with respect to every decision we took, right? Specifically with respect to the decisions around team that we will make. So one key parameter which came out, given our experience of 9-10 years of running VC funded startups, was that when you are running from one funding round to the next, it forces you to take very short-term decisions, right? And that was one of the reasons why we also decided not to raise VC rounds and bootstrap the company where we knew that it will be very difficult the first couple of years when we are trying to break even and we are trying to survive as a company. But it also gave us a lot of insight, having sold our previous company, that value for the team in a VC funded company is it in very rare cases gets built up, right? So we always hear a lot of examples, but those are all survivors. We don't hear examples of the companies which did not survive, or where the Esop did not ever give them any value back to the team, right? So we're very clear that we will build a company which, one, will create value for the team. Two, because we had the luxury of not having anyone external on the cap table, we were able to take these decisions that instead of only 10% of our equity pool, we will liquidate 25% of our equity pool for our team, right? So now again, from my perspective, it's a no-brainer, right? Because 90% of X versus 75% of 10X, I would always go for the latter, right? If this and a couple of people cannot build a team or build a company. It's the team which is going to build the company over a long period of time. And for them to have their skin in the game and for them to have a long-term view with Nuclear, right? It was important that, one, they understood the value of equity. Two, they understood that equity compounds and it will compound over a period of time. Its value compounds over a period of time. And three, we were able to give them a sizable chunk, which will make sure that 5 years or 7 years down the line, right? They become independent of money as a problem statement in their life. So that was one of few of the reasons why we chose 25%. So that aside, between ESARs and ESOPs, we did an extensive research. I spoke to a lot of people. I spoke to a lot of VCs also. And in candid conversations, one of the reasons which came up, that why do VC funded startups always go for ESOPs? One of the reasons, they're just used to it. The VCs are just used to it. The paperwork is something which they and their legal team is used to. And therefore, they recommend that just go for ESOPs. Why change anything, right? But when we did a comparative analysis between ESARs and ESOPs, one of the key differentiation which came out, and again, the core thought process was that we will build a policy which was always going to be, will follow all the best practices and which will be very employee friendly. So one of the key drawbacks of ESOPs is that you cannot issue ESOPs during the first year of employment. So there is always 1 year of cliff, right? So as soon as a person joins, they can only be issued ESOPs as per the regulation only after a year, completing an year. What if someone leaves in 9 months? So they will not have, no vesting will happen and they will not get any participation in those ESOPs, right? With ESARs, we can have that flexibility. So we created a policy where SARs, right, will vest on a monthly basis over the next 48 months. So it vests on a monthly basis equally over the next 4 years, right? Another drawback of ESOPs, which we saw, and I'm just highlighting the drawbacks of why we chose ESARs over ESOPs, right? Like there are quite a few advantages of ESARs as well. Another drawback of ESOPs, and this I believe is spoken about very rarely, is that whenever a liquidity event happens, right, a person has to first pay money to the company. So it's a two-step process, right? A person has to pay money to the company, purchase shares of the company, and then pay tax to the government, because there is a notional profit for the individual, right? And then someone buys those shares of you and you pay tax on capital gains, right? But this inherently runs a very big risk. What if the valuation of the company has gone down? What if the deal does not materialize? You would have paid money, you would have paid tax and purchased shares of the company, and what if the deal doesn't materialize? Then theoretically, again, you end up spending a lot of money and with shares which probably don't have that much value. In a lot of cases, and again, something which is not very spoken about, This was something which we also underwent with one of the companies where we raised VC rounds, and as most of the people would know that VC valuations are very, very frothy, right? Let me put it that way. So when actually a sale happens, it generally speaking happens at a down round. And with that down round, the VCs and the investors are always protected. Why? Because they have that downward protection. They will have their multiplication which gets applied, and they will get paid their own fair share of value. But this very rarely gets spoken about, that the Eso pool suffers the most, right? Whoever is acquiring the company, they would much rather make sure that the founders get paid well. They will compensate founders in a different way, but no one really cares about the Eso pool, where its valuation is decreasing a lot, right? But the Eso pool valuation decreases a lot, and that's a loss which people just don't have visibility towards, right? So that's one thing which Esops, have over ESARs, which generally is, which is kind of solved with ESARs. So with respect to ESARs, it's a one-step process. You only get the appreciated value, right? So at whatever price the SARs are issued to you, right? Whatever is the appreciation in those SARs, at the time of liquidity, you just get directly paid that differential amount to you. There is no two-step process. There is no, therefore, transactional risk involved, which is there with ESOP process. And these were, again, like some of the aspects on the basis of which we chose ESARs over ESOPs, and then went with it. Sorry, I went on a kind of a monologue.
No, that's wonderful. I think you have brought out a lot of points, and many of them actually naturally we wanted to discuss in the structuring aspect. So I think I'll pick on a lot of the concepts that you mentioned. I think this whole post-separation exercise, the strike price, the vesting cliff, I think you touched upon all the key elements that make up for a friendly ESOPs. So let's do that. So Ankur, thanks for that introduction to SARs. And yeah, I think one other difference maybe if you want to highlight is the SARs is mainly, I think if you do a liquidity, I think it will be done through the company, right? While ESOPs, you can also do it as a secondary. So you want to touch upon that, and congratulations, you did a liquidity event so early in your journey. So congrats. That also means you are thriving and profitable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, see again, that was also, I wouldn't lie. So it was also due to the market pressure, right? Like everyone across the market is, buying back equity. The only difference is that a lot of companies are using VC money to buy back equity. We are using our profit pool to buy back equity, and that's something which we we're very clear about while explaining to the team that we are not going to raise external capital at frothy valuation to pay ourselves. That's not what we are building here. We are building something which is sustainable in nature. We don't want to become financially free on the basis of someone else's money and then sell the company in 3 years and then start figuring out what else to do in life, right? We want to build this company for the long duration, in which that builds that annuity, right? Like what we talk about, building a recurring flow of income through our product. That's something which will also compound over a period of time. That will also help us grow into newer markets. But at the same time, it will be under our control. And we all know what is going on with some other fintech in the world, where there's a lot of boardroom politics happening, right? And all this happens because people lose control, because people become greedy for the short term, not for the long run, right? They are taking decisions with a very, very short term outlook. And that's something which we promised ourselves that we'll completely avoid. We'll always take decisions, whether it is with respect to the people we work with in our team, whether it is with respect to the clients we work with, right? So there have been clients who we have said no to, that we will not work with you. Why? Because they are very short-term thinkers. So we are more than happy to miss out on certain business opportunities, right? Because it doesn't align with our long-term value. And with that sentiment is where we, came around building the policy for ESARs, making sure that while communicating the buyback process as well, we were communicating. So I think 85 or 86% of the budget which we allocated for buyback remained unused. Only 14% of the buyback budget people applied to. Everyone else, asked us to reinvest into the company. Out of that 14%, also 12% of that budget was liquidated by ex-employees, not by current employees, right?
Okay.
So that also kind of gave me a lot of confidence that the current team which we have is invested in the company. Company is bullish about the company. And again, like that's the process which we want to follow. That's the sentiment which you absolutely love, right?
Correct.
Right. No, I think that's a great bit. I mean, it's like you budgeted something, it didn't get utilized. You're actually more double happy, I guess, given given that that is a trust that the employees have in your company, that they want to stay invested longer. Because ESOPs or ACRs also are a form of investment, right? So that's wonderful to know. So Ankur, wonderful. Thanks for sharing a lot of these practical nuances. I think the audience is also loving that you're quite frank in reflecting some of these experiences, because these are literally the decision parameters that founders go through in their early stages. Now, let me get to the next phase, right? So Ankur and Manish, and also to some extent Disha, we have a rapid fire for you. But before we expose you to rapid fire, I would request Sujit to post another poll where we'll just take the mood of the audience. Now that you have heard some practical nuances from Ankur, Manish, and Isha has nicely laid out the structural aspects of ESOPs. Maybe we'll hear from the audience as to what they think of their ideal ESOP plan. So Sujit, if you can roll out that poll. And here we're asking the audience that if, let's say, you are designing an ESOP pool today, what are the different parameters that you will kind of consider? And I think there might be a couple of polls on which we are covering all the points. So one is on the coverage, one is on the pool size. So do respond to this, and maybe Sujit, you can reflect that after the poll is over. So maybe you can give about 20-30 seconds for this. So in the interest of time, let me continue, right? So let me now pose these questions to you guys, right? So so there are various nuances Isha highlighted about ESOPs. So one is the cliff period. So Ankur, I think you nicely said you chose SARs because in a way you could avoid the cliff. Like you can start giving that value to the employee as soon as they just start joining, maybe, or in a quarter or in a 6-month time frame. Anything else, Manish, you want to add there? Anything? I'm presuming if you have a normal ESOP policy, there's a 1-year cliff, right? I think even in your previous organization, was it the case, Manish?
Right. It has 1-year cliff, and following 1 year, different companies have different kind of a policy. Most friendly policy would be to have monthly vesting, so that people can avail maximum number of ESOPs in the period.
Wonderful. So the 1-year cliff is in a way mandatory. I also got asked a lot of questions recently that Udaan announced publicly that they have done away with the cliff. And many people asked, okay, Udaan is an Indian company. How come it was, for ESOPs they did? But our guess there is they have a Singapore-owned entity. And I think in Singapore, the 12-month cliffs don't apply. Unless they have adopted a policy like what Ankur has adopted. So SAR gives you much more flexibility from those point of view. The next question that I'm shooting to you both is strike price. So I think Manish, what do you think should be the strike price? And maybe Sujit, you can also display the poll and maybe launch the second one. But Manish, what do you think should be the ideal strike price for ESOPs at an early stage? And
the strike price should be as less as possible, maybe 1 rupee, 10 rupee, whatever, like whichever minimal possible, that should be the strike price.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I think that is also where we are going. And I think there was a question also on that. How common is it to have an exercise price face value? I think many early stage companies these days are going for that. It also gives them advantage of communicating that most of the value that the company has created so far is going as value to you at the time of giving the option to you, right? In case of SARs, I think, Ankur, there is no concept of strike price, I guess, because you're not really exercising, but it's more the difference when the employee joins to when he or she is cashing out, kind of a thing, right?
Correct. So I think, like in our case, to be fair to everyone, right? Whenever we are issuing the SARs, every 6 months we do a fair valuation of the company by a third party through a discounted cash flow method, right? So this is not just a multiple of revenue, because that's not valuing the company, that's pricing the company. So we value the company as per the discounted cash flow, and it's not a frothy valuation. It's a very, very, I won't say conservative, but I believe it's a fair valuation of the company, right? And on the basis of that, we define the SAR price every 6 months. So that price is then also used to buy back. That price is also used to issue new SARs.
New SARs. Okay, perfect. That's wonderful.
That
I think
keeps it a level playing field for everyone.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think there's a lag, but Wonderful. I think what you're saying, I relate a lot to a post that Nitin Kamath from Zerodha actually put out, how they arrive at their valuations on solid fundamentals. So that's good to know. The next point, and I think somebody asked, can strike price be below face value? Not in India, Winston. But there are companies in Singapore, etc., who have issued zero strike price. That's exactly what like RSUs are, like deep discounted ESOPs, where employees don't have to pay anything, right? But in India, you still have it's capped at the face value, which also might be like 10 rupees or 1 rupee kind of a thing. So it's as low. Vesting. The next thing is also Manish alluded to vesting schedule and frequency. Vesting schedule is basically, is it a 4-year ESOP or a 5-year ESOP? So Manish, you mentioned that monthly is the most friendly. Of course it is. I think nowadays we are also seeing daily vesting. A couple of companies have issued daily vesting. I don't know how they would manage it, but definitely there are those. I mean, everyone wants to stand out, right? They want to look good and be in the media in some sense and attract people. That's the buzzword now. But what do you think should be the period? Is it 4-year optimal one or longer? And I'll go to Ankur next. Yeah.
In most of the companies, like most common use case I have seen is the 4 years one. A couple of companies go for 5 years or 3 years also, but 4 years is the common use case that I've seen.
So your recipe is monthly vesting and 4-year vesting. Ankur, anything different from you?
There's no science around this, right? So
right.
Ideally speaking, it takes good 7-8 years for you to build a company. See, there are many ways in which you have to, many considerations you have to take while creating this policy, right? One of the considerations is what is relevant in the market, what is prevalent in the market, and 4-year vesting is prevalent in the market. If personally speaking, equity, like if you're building a company for the long run, if you're building it to sell within 3 years, of course you should have accelerated vesting in place. But personally speaking, I would much rather go for a 7 or 8 year vesting. But because you also have to compete in the market, right? So that's why 4-year vesting with monthly vesting is
most
fair.
common.
It's okay.
Yeah, I think even a survey that we did, 4-year is the most common one. One thing you mentioned, very important, just as an off point, accelerated vesting. So maybe definitely look out for clauses where if your company is getting acquired or there is some kind of a large exit event possible, if there's an accelerated vesting, then you will stand to gain a lot. So Ankur, there are half of the people here are employees. So this is just a tip for them to nudge their founders to maybe look at accelerated vesting. In case, yeah.
Just one point to add there, like a lot of times we as humans also, we think very short term. So we only focus on the cash component which we are getting in our salary on a monthly basis, right? We delay the conversation around equity for a later date because a lot of times it's at least people feel that it's an uncomfortable conversation. But from my perspective, like any person in my team who has the courage to come to me and say that, you know what, I want more equity, it's music for my ears. It is actually music for my ears. Why? Because that person is thinking long term. And given the current scenario in which people are shifting companies in every few months, right? If someone is ready to commit for the long term, that attitude is, you cannot price it in gold. So you have to value that attitude. So if you are working in a company and if you really believe in the long-term value of that company, go to your founders, negotiate a good equity return and get that vesting, right? I have seen a couple of my friends suffer because of that, where they, delayed that conversation and the company got acquired. And they had no equity in the company.
No equity, yeah.
Otherwise, within 2 months, they would have accelerated 4 years of equity and that would have really generated enough wealth for them, right? But so, you're not like one person, no one can become rich by only earning salary, right? You have to invest in equity, you have to get that compound, and that's what is going to be the wealth generator for most of us.
Wonderful. I think again, great. I think if there are any prospective employees looking to join a startup, I think you know whom to apply, like if you're thinking long term with equity. Wonderful, Ankur. The next one I wanted to ask, and this is a highly debated point as well. This is basically post-separation exercise, right? That's once you leave the company. Isha also alluded to it that, and many a times people with a lot of options, vested options, actually lose out. like Ankur also mentioned, because they had to pay tax and they basically forfeited their options. Because let's say if you accrued 1 crore worth options, you will have to pay 30 lakhs of tax or something to even exercise them and then stay for a long, because the company didn't allow you to kind of hold the vested options for an extended period after you leave the company. So any and there, I've heard founders on both the sides, and both sound good, right? On one side you say, okay, once you have earned the options, you have the right and you can vest it. I mean, you can unlock it any point. And there are also founders, you said, okay, once you have left, I'm giving you the option to exercise in 1 week, 1 month, 2 months, but then beyond that I can't. So where do you guys stand? Maybe Ankur, you want to go first, and I think you alluded to it, and maybe in SARs this doesn't really apply, and maybe that's why you chose, but you want to talk about it?
No, it does. So for us, a shareholder and a SAR holder, right? And that's how we kind of call our teammates who have SARs, right? They're not different. From my perspective, they are the same, right? So at the end of the year, and we celebrate our anniversary around November or something, because that's the time when we first made our revenue as a company. We write to the team, to SAR holders and stakeholders or shareholders, right? So anyone who owns SARs in the company, they will hold SARs permanently. The only time when they will have to liquidate compulsory liquidation is a change of control, kind of an event happening in the company. So if someone is coming and acquiring us more than 75% of the company, then at that point of time, every SAR holder has to necessarily sell at the fair market value at which the acquisition is happening, right? But other than that, they can always choose to not sell. Right. And I have absolutely no right to force anyone to sell their SARs back to me.
Wonderful.
I can offer them a price. If they sell, it's their choice. If they don't sell, it's not under my control to force them to sell.
Wonderful. I think this is similar to the keeping an indefinite exercise window open for a vested option. So that's as employee friendly as you can get. Manish, I think you also alluded to it, and you said having a longer exercise window is beneficial, right?
Yeah, exactly. Having indefinite window is definitely much better. And like a couple of companies also go ahead and extend the window to up to 7 years instead of keeping it 3 months. So even that kind of makes it like almost like an indefinite thing, because like generally in 7 years period something happens.
Correct. So that's good to know. I think that transition we are seeing, being in the middle of structuring a lot of policies, we are seeing a lot of founders asking for a longer exercise window. I think those were some questions. I think there are a few audience questions, and I know we have run out of time, but given that we started 5 minutes late, so maybe we can take some of those questions from them. So one question is on how does one determine the grant price for future grants? I think it's the same as strike price. I think we answered that question. So maybe we'll go to the next one, and Kirti, you can always follow up with us. We'll share our coordinates. When the company allows the exercising of options even after the employee leaving, how is the tax perquisite that is at a time of exercising the option? Employer does not exist. So I think, yeah, the same question around exercising of options. So there's definitely a taxation implication if it's a normal ESOPs. Yes, I think that's where portals like Capita can help, because that can help you keep engaged. Even the employee, after they have left, they have access to their options through a system like Capita. There's a question on where should a bootstrap startup in services begin to have ESOP options. So one question was on timing. I think I'm using that where as when. So Ankur, Manish, any recipe on when should founders consider setting up an ESOP plan? Ankur, you want to go first?
Difficult question. I can say from personal experience, when I was convinced that our company will survive for 5 years, and that was after around approximately 2 years after we started the company. I mean, maybe 1.5 years after we started the company. That's when I realized that, this is where there will be value for the company, right? But that's just us. And probably in hindsight, we did not do it right, because initially we were just too focused on building the company, building the business, right? When we actually launched the SAR policy, at that point of time, we had to backdate a lot of SARs, people who had joined us from day one. It wouldn't be fair for me to start their vesting after 2 years, right? So at that point of time, we gave them upfront grant for the previous 2 years, and then issued them vesting, SARs which are vesting over the next 2 years. So that over a period of time, like their vesting will be across 4 years. But then we had to do a lot of work around that. So ideally speaking, start from day zero. But and in a funded startup, generally VCs will force you to have an ESOP policy from the day of investment for sure. In a bootstrapped company, I know it's tough because there are many other problems to solve, and this is probably not one of the priority things you would focus on. You will probably focus more on surviving, over months, over quarters, over years. But as soon as possible, start focusing on it. And even if you have to work it, have a few workarounds, don't be, thrifty. Definitely do backdated vesting and make sure that you are giving out enough grants upfront, which are fair in nature for everyone in your team.
Understood. So I think fair point. And Manish, I think what would be your answer? Like again, as early or during the funding round or something?
Yeah, so essentially, like you can decide like what's going to be your pool, and definitely if like one of the general norms which is there in the industry is that when you are going for your first fundraise, before that you allocate 10% before the VC funding. And then actually like it helps if you are even without VC funding, if you are able to allocate and give assurance to the employees that how much stake they are owning. You'll be able to hire a couple of key people who are going to shoulder you while you are in your startup journey. So it's best that you focus it on early on from day one itself, and have people who are partner in your company and not as an employee. Right. So that helps a lot in a longer way. And then again, as you are going at Series B or Series C level, over there again, you can negotiate with the investors and get another 10% or expand your pool to probably 20% or so. So that you're able to hire again key talent to grow company to the next level, right? So again that depends a lot on a hard negotiation that you're pressing against the investor. First one is the easiest one to take.
Wonderful. So I think that point you mentioned is quite important. A lot of founders can also consider topping up their ESOPs at regular intervals. And trust me, like a well-informed employee, a seasoned employee joining a startup will actually get a very positive signal if the company has a large ESOP pool, which means the founder has an intent to share, right? So I think that's a wonderful point that you brought about. I think there was one nuanced question on a particular individual on the offer he or she is getting. I think Adishwar he's getting. I think we did discuss this. Yes, I think if you are exercising your options, you will have to pay tax. Yeah, and that can be like linked to liquidity or not. You will have to pay tax. Like Ankur mentioned, when you exercise, you are actually buying the shares at a particular price. So whatever the difference between the market value and that price is treated as an income. And your employer has to withhold that tax. Actually, it's treated as an income tax, and it will be taxed at the highest bracket. So yes, Adishwar, that is a response. But you can write to us, and we can kind of work very. Maybe the last point I wanted to ask Ankur, you mentioned about a 25% pool, and Manish also intends to take it to the 20% mark. So we are seeing a lot of startups now trying to allocate a largish pool. So what was your thought process, Ankur? Was 25 just a number that you guessed, or there was a science behind deciding the pool sizes, etc.?
No science.
No science.
Like it was just gut feel. I'm just being honest. I can give you gyan on. We did so much research, and therefore 25% made sense. But there was no science. We just felt that 25% is a fair value at that point of time. And by the way, we still have an option to extend it. So it's not that we're against extending it. If I finish up my 25% pool allocation, we would happily extend it, because as I said, like 75% of X, 90% of X or 75% of 10X, right? So whether it is 75 or 70 or 60, it does not really matter. As long as company is creating value for everyone, more than happy to share.
Wonderful.
Having done 4 startups, right, you start becoming spiritual about these things. Like money becomes a secondary aspect you run after. It's the team, it's your peace of mind, it's your freedom which you run after. So I would much rather run after freedom and mind space rather than few extra bucks.
Right. Right. No, I think this is wonderful. I think there was a question from Kirti also specifically on bootstrapped or SME kind of companies, unlisted SME companies, and how should I think she's a consultant and they're looking at ways to incentivize SMEs, the employees of SMEs. So maybe SARs is definitely one option that you can link. Isha also alluded to few more possibilities like phantom or also the performance units, right? So anything anyone wants to add here, like if you're an SME, are there any equity linked schemes that you can engage in? Ankur or Isha, you want to add something?
So the
Yeah, go ahead.
SME part is one, but what she has essentially brought out is the value that they want to create for a consultant. And as an external consultant who does not own into the employee-employer relationship, it is difficult to get into an equity-linked instrument as of now. That's something which is regulatorily restricted in India, and that's where, like you brought out, instruments that could be valued or explored here are, one is the stock appreciation right, other one could be the phantom unit, or the third one could be which is the deferred performance plan unit. So these instruments are something that could be used from a external consultant basis.
Right. And we are actually seeing a lot of them recently. I think Unacademy created a pool for their partners. For the teachers, and Urban Company actually did it for their partners. So I think ESOPs or equity linked plans are getting broad based to even the partners, because I think they will grow only if the partners are also kind of loyal to it. So I think a lot of innovations happening. I think we are in that brilliant phase where every startup is trying to stand out in some way or the other. So that's great to note. So I think we've kind of covered. I think we also have last question on tax implications by company. Yes, I think we can discuss this offline as well. But yes, at the time of exercising, there is a tax implication, and platforms like Capita actually helps you calculate the tax and then give a report to the employer to withhold the tax so that they comply with their obligation through the laws of the land, basically, right? So that's pretty much all the answers. I think we've covered everything. So no thanks. I think we overshot, but so still very valuable. I think the questions were also very nice. Thanks a lot to the audience as well to keep this engaging. I think Ankur, Manish, Isha, all of you weighed in on your experience and were very frank in reflecting the realities. Also, some of the not so good experiences also of ESOPs from the past as well, and how that has impacted or influenced you to create your current policies. So thank you for being so candid, and thanks for elaborating on so many things. Of course, ESOPs are a complex topic, and I think we need more of these sessions to keep our employees aware of the latest happenings. So thanks a lot for joining today's session, and thanks everyone as well. If there's any feedback, please write to us. I've shared my email. We can also connect to all of you on LinkedIn. All of the panelists on LinkedIn. So please do that. And with that, I think let the fables of Esop continue, I think, in 2022. And I think we'll be back again with more of these sessions. Thank Pascal, Sanchit, Manish, etc. for giving us an opportunity. And again, thanks Ankur for finding the time and being so candid as you always are. And Isha, as always. So thank you so much. Sujit, thanks for setting this up. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.